enforcement folks and understand what the connection is between state and local law enforcement and the FBI, I think we'd see a lot less movement in the direction of saying, let's defund, let's eliminate, let's do all of these things when we look at the overall law enforcement infrastructure in the United States, which is part of our national security and defending the homeland and doing whatever we want in that direction. Thank you so much for your service. Really appreciate it.
Mr. Ryder-Holt.
Thank you, Director Wray. It doesn't always get a lot of media coverage, but there's been a lot of hostility against churches and religious organizations at alarming rates over the last few years. There was a report that was published back in February of this year that showed that there's been 430 incidences of hostility or violence against churches across the United States. That's a 100% increase from 2022, an 800% increase from 2018. I guess my question to you is what is the Bureau resources are being dedicated to explore and address this concerning trend that we're seeing?
So it's a really good question, and I would say the threats to houses of worship that we're seeing cut across a variety of settings, and I say that with the perspective of somebody who, when I was a line prosecutor, one of my most significant cases was against a guy who was a serial church arsonist and went all over the country burning down churches, including right up in our mutual neck of the woods in Georgia, where he killed in Banks County. He killed a firefighter and almost killed another one. So I've always taken those cases particularly seriously. I would say there's a couple things. We're seeing terrorist attacks against churches. Just in the time that I've been FBI director, we've thwarted multiple attacks against churches and synagogues. I can think of an ISIS-inspired plot against a church in Pittsburgh. I can think of synagogues in Colorado and Las Vegas area, just as a few examples. There's also, I would say, a range of threats from a perspective of abortion-related violence. So, a lot of people historically have focused on abortion-related violence when it comes to pro-choice facilities. But in fact, if you look at our work post the Dobbs opinion, it's been a while since I looked at our numbers, but I think something like 70% of our abortion-related violence cases were, after the Dobbs decision, were against what I would have called houses of worship or pro-life facilities. In fact, just yesterday we had a case, a guy got 7.5 years in a great case that our folks did against a guy who firebombed a facility up in the Madison, Wisconsin area. So we're tackling it depending on what the motivation for the threat is. Sometimes it might be some ISIS-inspired type attack. Some cases it might be some domestic ideology. In some cases it might be something else altogether. So in addition to our investigative work and working with state and local law enforcement on that, we are also, in every field office, I find that there's a whole lot of outreach and engagement with houses of worship in that area, so that the folks in those houses of worship know who to contact, what to be on the lookout for, that kind of thing.
I just, let me just say, thank you for the mention that, but, targeting and threatening of churches and religious organizations is something that cannot go unnoticed, and I would just employ that you would make sure that you do investigate and you try to make sure that this is a focus of your of the Bureau. The names Phoenix, Holly, Harriet, Christopher X, Hill, they're names that were given to the DC-5. Those were the 5 unborn children that remain, whose remains were salvaged by a whistleblower after their lives were brutally ended by late-term abortionists here in the Washington, D.C. area. There's evidence that suggests federal crimes may have been committed in their deaths through violations of the partial birth abortion ban and the born alive infant protections. As you know, this is the law of the land, and the administration has the duty to enforce the law without prejudice to political philosophy or those in violation of law. Instead of seeking justice for these babies or answers to whether federal crimes are committed, I'm concerned that some in the administration have decided to weaponize the FBI and its resources against pro-life Americans by investigating and arresting individuals for the FACE Act violations. Is the Bureau aware of the DC-5 case? And if so, is the Bureau investigating the DC-5 case?
As I sit here right now, I'm not familiar with the specific case. I can follow up with our folks on that. I will tell you, when it comes to FACE Act enforcement more generally, we've used that authority in both directions. In fact, I know that we had a case not that long ago where we secured FACE Act and conspiracy indictments against 4 individuals who were invoking the Jane's Revenge movement and who targeted pro-life facilities in their area. So we don't care which side of the abortion issue you're on. There's a right way and a wrong way to express your passionate views, but violence and threats against facilities is not it. And then we'll go after it no matter which side somebody's on.
Well, I'd like to get your commitment to use funds to investigate this DC-5 case.
Well, I'm happy to find out where we are with that. Like I said, I'm not familiar with the specific case, but we obviously want to make sure that if there's any properly predicated investigation we can conduct, that we do.
If you could get back with us and let us know what y'all are doing on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Let me do a little polling here. Do we need a second round of questions?
I don't if you don't.
Anyone here? I want to keep it as short as we can because I want this gentleman back at work. So, Mr. Collad, you're on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, on page 16 of your budget request, you talk about civil rights. So the FBI has the primary responsibility to investigate all alleged violations of federal civil rights laws. And then you talk about color of law violations in there, which is any person using the authority given to them by a government agency to willfully deprive someone of a right. So you talk about the FACE Act and voter suppression, et cetera. Have you ever investigated a Second Amendment rights violation? I mean, you've got the Bruin decision, which struck down a New York law, which took away people's Second Amendment rights. And I've never seen anyone in government ever prosecuted for violating citizens' Second Amendment rights. Can you think of any time when the FBI has actually, used color of law to prosecute someone for violating someone's Second Amendment rights?
Well, not as I sit here, but obviously we're a 115-year-old organization with 38,000 employees and something like 300 offices all over the United States. So I'm no doubt that there could be any number of investigations that I wouldn't be aware of.
Okay, all right. Then you have a request in your budget for $284,000 for official reception fund. That is almost 6 times what the United States Attorney himself receives. I mean, his is $50,000, the ATF is $36,000, the DEA is $90,000, U.S. attorneys are $19,600, but the FBI is $284,000. Why? Why is the FBI literally 6 times what Attorney General Merrick Garland's reception funds are?
I don't know that I could tell you as I sit here right now. I know that we have a lot of engagement with foreign partners, and that could be a big driver, but I can't, as I sit here right now, give you the specifics, but I'm happy to have my staff follow back up with you.
I would appreciate that very much. And then lastly, the Department of Justice is asking for a 1.25% increase totaling $467 million, all right? But the FBI is asking for a 6% increase totaling $629 million. So the FBI is asking for literally a 350% increase in funding, more than the overall Department of Justice is. In fact, if the total spending for the DOJ is going up $467 million, and the FBI is asking for $629 million, then the DOJ actually has to take a cut somewhere in order for the FBI to get their increase in funding of at least $162 million. So what on earth, what justifies that kind of an increase for the FBI?
So what I would tell you is, and we certainly appreciate the department's support, including the Attorney General's support for our budget request. You know, the effect of the fiscal year 2024 budget that was appropriated to us is the equivalent of about 1,000 per position cut. It's about a $500 million cut in our ability to get our job done. And so when you look across the range of threats that we are responsible for protecting Americans from, violent crime, 50 bad guys per day, every day, ransomware, 100 different ransomware variants that we're investigating, the Chinese, 1,300% increase in Chinese economic espionage, the Chinese hacking program, which outnumbers us by well over 50 to 1, fentanyl, we seized 270 million persons worth of fatal fentanyl in the last 2 years. And so the range of threats that the FBI is statutorily responsible for protecting Americans from is significant, and the impact of the 24 budget is such that most of what our budget request that you've talked about there calls for is to put us back on track so we can keep doing the hard work of keeping bad guys away from those people.
Okay, so what are the technical adjustments? $192 million for technical adjustments and $286 million in adjustments to base. What is that?
I think the adjustments to base is sort of appropriation speak for the point that I was just making about getting us back on track in terms of the positions that essentially we would lose because of the impact on our cost of operations of the 24 budget.
And the technical adjustments?
That part, again, I'd have to go back and look at the specifics, but I can tell you that most of our budget is to get us back on track. We have a few enhancements, specifically on cyber, counterintelligence, and NICS, but that's essentially this year, that's essentially our budget.
All right, thank you. My time's expired. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Yield myself 5 minutes. Mr. Director, let me ask you about these global terrorist networks that you've mentioned. You recently testified that the threats, quote, have gone to a whole other level, quote, and that foreign terrorists, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, have renewed calls for attacks here in the U.S. Could you expand on that?
Yes, sir. So first off, I would say even before October 7th, I would have told you, and I was telling other committees, that we were at a heightened threat level because across a range of different terrorist vectors, we were, like I said, at a heightened threat level. After October 7th, though, is when we went to a whole nother level. And part of that is that we've seen a rogues gallery of foreign terrorist organizations calling for attacks on us. You've got Hezbollah expressing support and praise for Hamas and threatening to attack U.S. interests in the region. You've got Al-Qaeda issuing its most specific call for an attack against us, against the U.S. in the last 5 years. You've got AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, calling for jihadists to attack Americans and Jewish communities in the U.S. You've got ISIS urging its followers repeatedly to attack Jewish communities in the U.S. And the irony is that, as anybody who has studied terrorism knows, these are terrorist organizations that don't typically see eye to eye, but they seem to be united in one thing, which is calling for attacks on us. And so you add on top of that my concern, which I have repeatedly flagged, which is that when you look around the world at foreign terrorist organizations, you can see in Afghanistan the concern about whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS-K growing strength and reconstituting. And of course, we've lost some of our ability to gather intelligence on the threat there. You can look at Africa and look at ISIS and Al-Shabaab and the growth of those organizations there. In fact, Al-Shabaab is now the best funded branch of Al-Qaeda. You could look at Syria and ISIS's repeated efforts to free some very dangerous fighters that are in the prisons there. And so then you look at things like the attack we just had in Moscow, an attack in Iran, before that, ISIS attacks. And so when organizations like Al-Qaeda, like ISIS, express an intent to conduct attacks against us, it's something we need to take very seriously. And so that's part of why I've highlighted this as a heightened threat. This is not a time for panic. It is a time for heightened vigilance.
Mr. Carley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, the topic of anti-FBI rhetoric raised its head today, and I wish to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Ruppersberger that I am dismayed about it, and particularly that it found its way into today's hearing. And I regret that it has become fashionable in some corners to attack the FBI. This is an elite law enforcement agency. The top law enforcement agency in this country protects us from all manner of mayhem, from child predators, cyber threats, drug trafficking, gang violence, international terrorism, Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab. These are men and women that have dedicated their lives to the protection of American citizens. They don't deserve to have threats leveled against them with anti-FBI rhetoric ginning them up. Last week, a man crashed an SUV into the security gate at the FBI's Atlanta Field Division building. He then resisted efforts by FBI agents to bring him into custody. Although this investigation is still underway, I am concerned about threats to FBI agents and FBI facilities in the field, particularly in light of anti-FBI rhetoric from far too many public officials. And I'd like you to comment on that. To what extent are you seeing an uptick in threats against the FBI? And what does that do to morale within the agency?
Well, you asked a couple different questions there. I guess let me start with the threats, because that's ultimately what matters the most. Rhetoric is rhetoric, and there's a lot of heated rhetoric in this country across a range of issues. But when it comes to threats and threats of violence, that's something we take extremely seriously. And we have seen a substantial jump in threats towards FBI personnel and facilities from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23. In fact, we created a dedicated unit to try to deal with those issues. You mentioned the Atlanta field office one. I won't discuss that specific case, but just last year in our Cincinnati field office, we had an individual wearing a tactical vest, armed with an AR-style rifle and a nail gun, tried to forcibly enter and attack our personnel. And after he was thwarted in reviewing his devices and his postings, he was calling on people to kill federal law enforcement and to fight, in his own words, a civil war. And unfortunately, this is part of a broader phenomenon that we see in the country right now, which is an uptick in violence against law enforcement, not just FBI, but state and local law enforcement. And we've had breathtaking paces of violence against law enforcement. Having a badge is dangerous enough as it is. It shouldn't make somebody a target. And some of these threats target law enforcement's family members, which is despicable. Like I said, these are dangerous jobs, and I talk every week. One of the things to state and local law enforcement are going through a lot of the same thing in their own way. I call one of the things I started doing when I started this job was every time an officer or a sheriff's deputy is killed anywhere in the country in the line of duty, I call the chief or the sheriff myself to express my condolences on behalf of the FBI. And we talk about the individual's family and career and everything else. And I have made 381 of those calls since I started as FBI director, 14 just so far this year. We've lost in 2021, we lost 3 of our own. 2 agents killed in Miami and a task force officer ambushed right outside of our office in Terre Haute, Indiana. So violence against law enforcement is real, it's appalling, and it's something we take very seriously. Now, when you talk about morale, which is the other part of your question, obviously no one likes to see the organization you've dedicated your lives to unfairly attacked and criticized. But our people are more focused on the people we do the work with, the people we do the work for, and the work itself. And I don't get too hung up, and I think our folks don't get too hung up on rhetoric. Our focus is on, do people want to work with us? You bet they do. They're applying in droves. It's gone up. Recruiting's gone up significantly since I've been director. Do they want to work with us on task forces? State and local police departments, who are all down in terms of their head count, are sending more and more task force officers to work on our task forces. And it sure as heck isn't because they don't have enough work in their home department. Do people want to turn to us for help? You bet they do. I see business leaders more and more turning to us with cyber attacks and Chinese economic espionage. I see the public calling our public access line in West Virginia more and more turning to us for all manner of tips and threats. It's almost like we sort of defaulted into becoming like a national 911 center. So do people want to work for us? More and more. Do people want to work with us? More and more. Do people want to turn to us for help? More and more. And so that ultimately is what our folks really care about. Would we prefer not to be criticized? Of course.
Director Wray, thank you for your comments and thank you for your work. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
So when Neil's back, Mr. Klein, do you desire time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
And I want to thank the large number of law-abiding agents within your agency who work hard for the American people every day. But we can't ignore the violations that have occurred within the FBI by some individuals and the policy changes that were necessitated by those abuses. And for some on the other side to talk about anti-law enforcement rhetoric when morale is at an all-time low in local law enforcement offices because of the defund the police movement on the left, it is rich. It is rich to hear this come from the other side. So my colleague who spoke critically about the performance of some in your agency, Mr. Wray, was doing so with a love for country